As usual, I'm going to start with some housekeeping. To avoid any disruptions during the talk, if you could please just ensure that your mics are kept on mute throughout. I try to do a job here by putting everyone on mute, but occasionally there are a few that do become unmuted. So if you could just ensure that you are muted throughout the talk, that'd be great. There will be an open Q&A session after the talk, and if you'd like to ask a question, usual way, please use the hand up icon, which is located in the participant section, or by hovering your mouse over your image, the three little dots on the screen, and you'll see their hand up. Please don't use the reactions button because it's difficult to see everybody at once, and I may miss you out. Brethren, before I start, or before I introduce our next speaker, just taking into recent light about the rule of six and the effect that it's having on people's mental health. I just wanted to put it out there that if anyone is suffering or does know if anyone's suffering, please do let us know. There are contact details, numbers of people we can give to help in these sort of situations. If anybody is feeling a little bit alone, or if you know of anyone that is, please do help out a brother or a friend in need, as you always have done and always will continue to do so. But there are details on both United Grand Lodge and Mark Mason's Hall Grand Lodge website with phone numbers and communications on there with who to get in contact with for additional help and support. So please do use those facilities. Once again, we are giving away 2 of our bespoke mugs. Now, we gave 4 away last week to make up for the lost time the week before. The question simply is, in which province of England was Richard appointed as Provincial Grand Master in the Mark degree? Please type your answers in the chat section, and as always, the first 2 correct answers will win. Brethren, it's now my pleasure to introduce you to the Right Worshipful Brother Richard Gann. Richard was born in 1950, educated at the Beckett School, Nottingham. He graduated from London University with a degree in geology, where he also took a master's degree in education. In addition, he holds a degree in management studies from the Open University. His professional career was both successful and varied, including teaching and educational administration at a senior level. He retired as the Deputy Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons in June 2010, and is a Senior Grand Officer in all the major orders of Freemasonry. Having relinquished the role of editor of The Square in 2014, he now has more time to develop his writing and research into Victorian Masonry and the orders beyond the craft. He was initiated in 1977. He became a full member of Qatar Corinthia Lodge, the Premier Lodge of Masonic Research, in 2014. From 2013 to 2017, he was the Mark Provincial Grand Master. I'm not going to tell you the province because you have to guess that yourself. And is currently the Grand Principal Conductor of the work of the Grand Council of Royal and Select Masters of England and Wales. Right Worshipful Brother Richard Gann, the floor is yours. Richard, you'll have to take yourself off mute. There we go.
I've done that. Good evening, brethren. I hope just to make sure, can people hear me? Right,
yes,
thank you.
We can hear you.
The plan is that I intend to talk for about 20 minutes, and for those of you that know me will know that is a challenge in itself, and then to take any questions that you might wish to offer. It's a story that doesn't immediately spring to mind, but I hope catches some of your imaginations. And if at the end of the exercise you say, well, I never knew that, then I'll have achieved something. It's in the form of what I tend to call a lantern show, but nevertheless a slide presentation. And if I now try and share that, you can see if it's going to work or not. Just bear with me.
Perfect, Richard.
Right. That all right?
Perfect.
Okay, so this is the story of 2 Mark Mason's Hall that we had and 2 that we never had. And one of the things I realized in putting this talk together is that the current Mark Mason's Hall, indeed its predecessors, are unique in the Masonic world. There are plenty of Freemasons' Hall all over the world, but because of the way that the Mark was founded in this country, I don't, to the best of my knowledge and belief, believe that there is another Mark Mason's Hall anywhere in the world. Now, the story starts basically in 1856, or rather, it doesn't start. Hang on. There we go. With the formation of Mark Grand Lodge in June 1856. That's the advert that appeared in the Times advertising for members after the event, when basically Bonaccord Lodge converted almost overnight into Mark Grand Lodge. Over the years, the headquarters of the Mark degree has been somewhat varied. And initially, until 1890, it operated in various offices. The first one being the first Grand Secretary, Louis Collins, and operating from his home. He was a solicitor, and until 1890, people used various offices round and about to administrate, but nowhere could you actually meet. So the first Mark Mason's Hall was set up in 1890. From 39 to 55, again, office occupied in Kingsway. We then had the situation of the two Mark Mason's Hall that never were, and then a sojourn, a complete debacle really, where Mark Grand Lodge moved to Upper Brook Street, and some of you are young enough to remember Brook Street. I just missed out on that. I was one of the first to actually meet in Mark Mason's Hall when we moved there in 1979. Now, the standing of an organization depends on a number of different things. One is the social standing of the head and the rulers of the particular order, the size and influence of its membership, and the quality of its headquarters building. And that applies to any organization, Masonic or otherwise. So these three things actually came together sometime after the formation of Mark Grand Lodge. And we can look at what I've termed the golden age of Mark Masonry, which is basically the period from 1880 to 1930. The first Mark Mason's Hall has its genesis really in two very fine masons. And if anybody is interested, most of the things that I'm speaking about this evening, you will be able to find more information elsewhere. I'm going to try not to bore you with facts and figures, but just paint a nice broad picture. So the people we owe great debt to are the Reverend Canon George Portal, whom, as you see, had two. He was president of the General Board on 2 occasions and Grand Master. The fourth son of a very well-off family that lived in Sussex. I think on his birth certificate, it said something like he was the son of a paper manufacturer, which doesn't sound very exciting until you realize that the paper manufacturer in question used to print banknotes. And so came from a very well-off family. As happened in Victorian times, the first son was the heir, the second son was the spare, the third son went into the army, and the fourth went into the church. And his first curatorship, or rather the amount of money allowance he got from his father on qualifying as a clerk in Holy Orders, was £500 a year, which roughly translates into these days about £50,000 a year. So quite well off, and basically public school, Oxford, and then the church. His opposite number, Frederick Binks, who was the Grand Secretary over the period that we're talking about, was the son of a wine merchant born in Cheltenham. He, fascinating character, carried out a dual role of being Grand Secretary of the Mark, as you can see, for almost 30 years or just over 30 years. He was also the Secretary of the Boys and Girls Charity at the same time. He had 2 stipends, each of about £250, and again, £50,000 a year. So quite 2 very successful chaps. From a standing start in 1856, By the time we get to the start of the Golden Age, we're looking at something like 281 lodges and almost 15,000 advancements having taken place. What really took us forward was in 1883, the advancement of the Prince of Wales. And almost immediately after being advanced into the degree, he was installed as a past Grand Master. Those of you interested in politics could have a look, or could do worse than having a look, to see when the Prince of Wales was initiated into Freemasonry, which happened in Sweden. And it took the craft the best part of a year to work out how to deal with his initiation and the complications that arose from it. Nothing like that with a Mark. Very pragmatic, always has been. One of the earliest photographs of a Masonic meeting, this is taken in the temple in Freemasons Hall. That is the actual installation of the Prince of Wales as past Grand Master. Now on the next slide, you can see I've got nothing to move with. The left-hand side is Binks at his secretarial table. His Royal Highness Prince of Wales in the centre, and note the droopy chain. And again, a little bit of background. The collars that we wear these days, as opposed to chains, really emulated the droopy chain, if I can put it in those terms. Canon Portal is sat on the very right-hand side as a past Grand Master. And on the left, as we're looking, is the Earl of Latham, who's quite a fascinating character. Provincial Grand Master for Lancashire. That's his portrait that hangs currently in Mark Mason's Hall. Quite a character in his time. There's a lovely, it looks as though you could sort of hide a load of small animals in that beard of his. And known as the cycling herb because he got very much sort of into the, not health and efficiency, but the importance of cycling. Quite a character, easily recognizable almost anywhere because of that wonderful beard of his. So, the Golden Age, second part. 3 years later, His Royal Highness Prince of Wales installed as Grand Master. Lovely picture again hanging in the current Mark Mason's Hall. You can see the various jewels that he is wearing there, which was the custom of the time. So basically, between them, Portal and Binks managed to get the Mark up and running. They managed to, I won't say persuade, but it wouldn't have happened just like that with the installation of the Prince of Wales as Grand Master. And then in 1890, buying or leasing from Grand Lodge the first Mark Mason's Hall. Now, where it is 64 to 65 Great Queen Street, opened in June 1890. And we're now looking north from Great Queen Street. So the Connaught Rooms, as you can see there, is behind us. On the right, as we look, and I always get my east and west mixed up, that is now part of the Connaught Rooms, and it is the Edinburgh Suite or the Edinburgh Room. So when you're standing there, that was Mark Mason's Hall and the Grand Temple. And the Kingsway Hotel, which has now been demolished, and the Kingsway Hall, which has been demolished, you can see. But hopefully, those of you that have been to Freemasons Hall can now have a picture of exactly where we're talking about. It was the former Bacon's Hotel. So in many ways, ideal as a Masonic premises because it had large spaces and catering facilities. And we're lucky enough to have the original plans. That's the ground floor, dining areas, anteroom, lodge rooms. Almost, they had to spend money to refurbish it, leased, and this is important for those of you who can do sums, for 49 years. And the lease ran from 1889. So do your sums, it'll come in a relevance later. And you can see there the hall at the top of the stairs on the first floor. Things like the boardroom at the bottom, which used to be, in fact, 2 rooms in a private house. A lot of it has sort of been knocked about. The hall itself, sorry, the top part, obviously you've got the void to fill at the top. The organ I'll say a little bit about when we get there. That is the view from the west looking east. The portraits around the wall I'll describe in a moment. All the upholstery was in purple and gold. There are the portraits right around the building. So all past Grand Masters and the story behind them. And if I forget, somebody remind me, you'll see that 4 of them are still full length, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are cut off at apron level. There's a reason for that, which I will explain in due course. And that's again another view. The 3 overseers' chairs are still in use. And in fact, when I was Deputy Grand Secretary, I had 2 of those for visitors in my office. They don't look entirely comfortable, and depending who was coming to see me, depended how they were arranged for the person to sit in. Again, portraits around the wall of all the Grand Masters, and Latham you can see first one on the right there. Round the hall itself, I don't know if I can go back, you can see there's a motto or a slogan that goes all the way around. I'll give you a few minutes to read it for yourself rather than for me to try and illustrate it for you. And I can come back to that if anybody wants to see it again. That is the view looking from the master's chair towards the entrance. And you can see there the organ, which in fact is the Portal Memorial organ, because although he helped with Binks organize everything in 1889, they signed or they arranged it in February. And unfortunately, Portal died in the April. Long story, but he never actually saw his building completed. The boardroom, some of you will recognize the tracing board on the wall still there. The Oxford and Cambridge dining rooms are where Sandbridge Hall used to be at the front end, and the Balmoral room, which adjoins the Grand Hall, is at the back end. Now, if you think about it, all the Masonic activity was taking to our left or to the west. So there's no way that the Mark Mason's Hall could be incorporated for Masonic activities. The best that could happen is it could be incorporated into the Connaught rooms and used for catering, which is eventually what happened, or leased to a third party. And it may be that the third party was not things, but have a trade that was not entirely compatible with what was going on next door. So in 1918, Mark Masons realized that eventually the lease would be given up. And so they started a building fund, 6p per member per year. By 1930, when they were told they couldn't have their lease renewed, they launched what became, let's call it the Keystone campaign, which is where we now get Keystone lodges from and Keystone provinces. And the monies were collected, and what was purchased in 1938 was the site opposite, marked in blue, next to the Hercules pillars stretching around at the back. And it was actually bought with the monies that had been collected to date. So they purchased the lease for purchased the building, sorry, for £50,000. Suddenly in 1938, for no obvious reasons, and neither I, Neville Barker Cryer, R.M. Hanfield, who wrote the official history of Mark Mason's Hall, have found out why Grand Lodge, UGLE, suddenly turned around and said, yes, you can rent it. In fact, we're prepared to give you a 99-year building lease, albeit with break clauses and at a higher rent, but nevertheless, you can have the building. Now, they decided, Mark Mason's Hall or the Grand Lodge, that, okay, regardless of whether we build across the road or refurbish 64, the existing Mark Mason's Hall, the staff move out. 1939, the staff do indeed move out to a building in Kingsway, next to the Kingsway Hall, and plans are advanced for the building of the new Mark Mason's Hall opposite the road where they have purchased. And in 1940, they released the plans to the members, and you'll see those in a few minutes, with a completion date proposed of 1942. Now, what happened, of course, was the Second World War, and all building ceased almost before it started. What then happened was that Mark Mason, or Grand Lodge, I should say, changed their minds again and decided, rather than build across the road, to rent or continue renting the original Mark Mason's Hall. And on that basis, in 1945, sold the site opposite, losing £8,000 in the process. The problem came immediately after the war, where they couldn't get a building license to build either across the road, because they've sold the building, or indeed to do the refurbishment of the old Bacon's Hotel. They drew up plans. That's what it was going to look like. The plans cost them £2,500 or just under, and they were ready to proceed. All of a sudden, the project never was abandoned. And what happened was that in 1955, there is a 10-year gap, the plans were sold on, we presume, to Grand Lodge, who owns the Connaught Rooms, and this is what is there now. That is, the main entrance is just to the right. That is what is there. If you can compare the two, they got a bargain for their £100 for the plans, apart from the canopy on the front. If you look at the windows, if you look at the palisades, and even to the the guardrail at the top, that is what is there. For whatever reason, so having decided to sell a building that they owned to take on board a leasehold building, they then decided to move to Upper Brook Street, which they bought for £86,000. And that they did in 1955. In the meantime, the old Mark Mason's Hall is falling down. The newly purchased one, where the building was going to take place, has been sold on, albeit at a loss. Nobody knows why we moved to Upper Brook Street, because that's it. It's basically a townhouse between Grosvenor Square and Park Lane. There were two smallish temples on the ground floor, and it may be that people who are listening actually did meet there. It's not in what I call Mason's Land, which is obviously the area around Great Queen Street. Nowhere to dine in the building, and people had to move elsewhere to dine. Not the brightest of moves, and were there till 1979. What then happens is change of Grand Secretary, and moves were made, first of all, to purchase, as you can see, 12 Duke Street, next to Supreme Council. There was even a plan, when talking about the current Mark Mason's Hall, for Supreme Council to share the premises. There was a lot of mixed membership, so a lot of people on Supreme Council were also involved in the higher echelons at Mark Mason's Hall at Grand Lodge, and it could be that that's what prompted. But as you can see, bought for 155, sold 2 years later. The thing that came about was a masterstroke. It was the appointment of Bill Leake, the involvement of Keith Carmichael, and his name's gone from me for the minute, and it'll come back to me, the president of the General Board, who was also then the Sovereign Grand Commander of Supreme Council, where they looked at and decided to get by the lease the current Mark Mason's Hall. The masterstroke was persuading the Charity Commission to enable the lease to actually be taken on by the Mark Benevolent Fund and then re-sublet to Mark Mason's Hall, which is what happened in 78, 79. And at last, in 1980, Brook Street was sold and actually made a surplus. So money was never the issue as to why we moved from the original Mark Mason's Hall. How's the money raised for all of this? I mentioned before 1918, sixpence per member per year. New Premises Fund 1930. Many of you will be members of a Keystone Lodge or indeed a Keystone Province. The amount of monies that was raised was quite phenomenal. And the one thing that really sticks in my mind is the number of overseas districts that made such a contribution to the money that was raised for all the various buildings that we have been talking about. The sums are there, and I'll come back to them, but I'm not going to go through them because you've probably had enough already. But it's important to note that in 1979, the various temples in Mark Mason's Hall in St. James's were named after the 5 overseas districts that had contributed, 3 districts overseas that had contributed the most, the 2 English provinces that had contributed the most to the fund, and to 1 London lodge, which was not then a province, the Johann Gutenberg, which is down there in the basement. And you can see there that the total cost involved in the purchase and refurbishment of our current Mark Mason's Hall was near enough £1 million. The site itself incorporates the historic thatched house tavern. The architect was also responsible for a number of buildings throughout London. Next time you stand opposite and the sun is shining, it really is quite colourful. The birds and the foliage, I'll show you the slide in a moment, then you can see what to look for, was done by the same sculptor as the City of London School on the old City of London School on the Embankment. It's now a Grade 2 listed building. All buildings, if they're graded, have to, are given a, if you like, why have they been graded? Usually 1 or 2 characteristics. In the case of our Mark Mason's Hall, the panelled entrance hall, which most of you dash through, but again, well worth having a look, and the staircase. And again, I'll show you photographs in a minute. It was built, as you can see, 1866, most often used as a club. We bought the lease from the Constitutional Club, and there's no discrepancy in dates. The original transfer of the lease was 1977, but it wasn't, if you like, we didn't take over the actual building as such once the refurbishment had been done until 1979. That's the building. You can see it shining, and as you see that across the balustrade, particularly at the top, you can see the carvings both at the top there and around the doorway. Things to look at there are, as you can see, the master's chair, porter's chair, globe, the pedestal. Now, the porter's chair is now in the boardroom, and you can see that in a moment. The story goes that when they were clearing out from Brook Street, somebody actually got into the building and got the chair and was caught running down Upper Brook Street with it and was brought back to the building. The OSM pedestal is still there, and a stone around the corner from King Solomon's Temple. One of the problems, we don't have a museum at all at the hall because of lack of space. And they used to hang there the receipt from Morton Edwards when he handed over the ownership of the Royal Ark Mariner to Grand Lodge for £25. It went missing. It's since been found, but it's too valuable to put on display, otherwise it might go walkabout at the moment. The other 2 main features of our current hall are the stained glass windows and the various paintings. That's the staircase for the listing. You can see some of the portraits around and about. The boardroom with the 2 globes, terrestrial and celestial at the bottom, and the porter's chair, and the portraits of the various grand secretaries. Delightful room, and just the right size for a board meeting. Part of the stained glass window, I say stained, I think they're painted onto the glass, and they occur in nearly every room in the building. The Grand Temple used to be the dining room in the Constitutional Club, and the room at the back that the tilers use for their equipment used to be the bar. That again is the Grand Temple with the windows. organ and secretary's table in the usual place. And you can see how much love and attention has now been devoted to Mark Mason's Hall with the level of the decorations that are shown. The Brazil Temple was also part of the bar. That the top right there is the entrance to the Tyler's suite and the bar. Now, I mentioned, I'll go back because I've almost finished, to the paintings, if I can find them. Let me just bear with me as I sort of trail back. They're the paintings, and as you can see, 3, 4 full length and some cut off at the bottom. I can't really, there's no way that you can defend it. When they moved to Upper Brook Street, there was no room for all the portraits. And so they decided to hang them on the stairs. And the only way they could get them on the stairs was by cutting off the bottom of the paintings, a sort of a barbaric act, but nevertheless, all still in situ. And there, if I quickly now go back to where we started, I like to think that all good meetings should end, he said, with the prospect of a good meal. So there we are, brethren. Maybe slightly more than 20 minutes. I hope it has been of some interest, and I am happy to try and answer any of your various questions.
Richard, thank you so much. Brilliant. Absolutely wonderful to learn a little bit more about our wonderful Mark Mason's halls and the ones that were never there either, or never were, should I say. We have got questions. If you don't mind, if you could just stop sharing your screen for me. Thank you. And I will go to, first of all, Brother Ted in New York City. Hi, Ted.
How you doing? Good to meet you. Good to see a fine lecture. I'm confused, however, being a New Yorker and the USA. What is the relationship of Mark Mason, the Grand Mark Master Mason, and the United Grand Lodge of England?
The short answer is absolutely none. The system that you're familiar with in the United States mirrors that we have with our colleagues in Scotland, where the Mark degree is an integral part of Royal Arch chapter, or the Red Lodges, as I believe you may call them. It's the subject of another talk at some future point as to what happened and why. But no, the Mark is fully independent of the craft, as indeed is the ancient accepted right in this country. So friendly relationships exist between all of the, if you like, the 3 major orders and the other orders of Freemasonry in this country. That is not in any shadow of doubt. There were moves to incorporate the Mark as part of the craft, but those moves failed for a number of different reasons. I can go into more detail, but there wouldn't be any more time to answer any other questions, I'm afraid.
I would love to have a reference book if you can provide it.
Yes, in fact, I'm just trying to think. Not last year, what year are we in? In 2018, as part of the Grand Stewards, Mark Grand Stewards Lodge in this country, gives an annual lecture. And I had the privilege of doing that in that year. And so there is a copy available, which will, I hope, explain the early history of the Mark and how it came about to be an independent order in this country rather than an integral part, as in Scotland and in the United States.
And where does one take the first 3 degrees?
In a craft lodge, in a blue lodge,
attached
the same
to
way as anywhere else. And so you basically do the 3 degrees and then are eligible to progress further. In fact, if you look at the Mark Mason's Hall website, I'm pleased to see it's now just the orders there are described as the progressive orders.
Okay.
So
Great,
thank
in
you so
essence, sorry, not to belabor it, you do your first 3 degrees as you would, I think, anywhere in the world. And then you have the opportunity to go into the Royal Arch, the Mark, and then the other orders, various orders that are available.
And all the others are part of the Mark Masons.
No. You've got various things like there are 10 various orders administered from Mark Mason's Hall, but some of them, like the Knights Templar and the OSM. The OSM was the last one to come under the wing of Mark Mason's Hall back in, I think, 1958. As late as that.
There's much to learn. Thank you so much.
There's a lot there, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Well, not afraid. It's quite interesting stuff, but there is indeed.
Which
Thank
means
you so much. Thank you so much.
thank you, Ted. Could we now go to Paul Greek? Hi, Paul. Paul, I think you're on mute, Paul. Paul, you're on mute.
Thank you, Richard, for a fascinating talk, very well presented as usual. I just wanted to ask, which were the 2 halls that never were? Because you described in your talk what each of the halls were. So I was trying to figure out which ones were the missing ones.
Right. What you've got is the first hall was 1890, which was the Bacon's Hotel. Okay. You've then got, they moved from, in effect, from, how can I put this? They moved from Bacon's Hotel to Upper Brook Street. So there was nothing in between. But what happened was they had the opportunity either to they bought the site for a new Mark Mason's Hall behind Toy Kenning and Spencer, okay? And they then had the opportunity to renew the lease on Bacon's Hotel and refurbish it. So initially, they were told by Craft Grand Lodge, you can't have a renewal, which is why they bought the site behind Toy Kenning and Spencer. In 1938, UGLE changed its mind and said, you can, after all, renew the lease on Bacon's Hotel for 99 years. Mark Grand Lodge decided to do that, to lease or release the hall and refurbish it, but the war intervened, so they couldn't do it because they couldn't get a building license to do the refurbishment, and meanwhile they'd already sold the site behind Toy Kenning and Spencer. So if you like, the 2 that we never had was the one of the site behind Toy Kenning and Spencer, okay, and the one where I showed you the 2 diagrams of what is now the Connaught Rooms, where the plans were all drawn up, purpose-built, air conditioning, grand temple for 500, seating. That is really the one that never happened. And we've still got the plans for that and the drawings from 1940, because they needed to raise money to actually carry out the refurbishment, which they got. I hope that's a little bit more clear.
No, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Paul. Next, can we go to Brother Derek Burt, please? Hi, Derek. You're on mute, Derek.
Yeah, trying to get it off. Okay, I found that very interesting. And the original buildings in Great Queen Street were very ornate.
Yes.
And they looked absolutely splendid. The other thing I was going to ask you, can you remind me who is the bust in the boardroom between the 2 globes? There's a bust.
Yeah, I believe that is Lord. You know, I tried to look it up, and if I am wrong, please somebody out there correct me. I believe it is Lord Harris that is the bust that sits on the table right at the end there.
So what's his significance?
He was Grand Master and then Program Master. So I think rather than paint portraits, they made the bust of him. I've done a study of the pictures, and I have to admit that sometimes you have to say I don't know when I'm not able to find out the history behind the bust. But it's still magnificent and still sitting there in all its glory.
And then the other thing, there's that very big stone that was in the entrance hall.
Yes.
It's about 5 or 6 foot tall. Is that the one that you said was King Solomon's temple?
Yes,
Well, I
take that
wouldn't
with a
think
very
anybody
big.
would pick it up and run away with it.
No, no, no. It was just the porter's chair they tried to run away with. The stone that we're referring to was that in the 1930s, it was the Earl of Stradbroke went on a visit to Jerusalem, and I think Ian Alexander may well have done it himself. There have been more recent trips, and one of the highlights is under the auspices of the Grand Chapter of Israel to take the Mark degree in what is believed to have been the quarry of King Solomon's, the quarry where the stone for King Solomon's temple was actually mined. And as a souvenir, I mean, some of us bring smaller souvenirs home as opposed to something from memory. It was about 4 foot tall, isn't it? The piece that was in the foyer there. So that was brought home in the 30s as a souvenir from the quarries of King Solomon's temple.
You may remember someone called Norman Price.
Yes.
Many years ago. Well, he brought back a piece of stone from the quarries when they went to a Mark meeting there, which I now have.
Good.
Thank you very much. That was very
Pleasure.
interesting, Richard.
Thank you, Derek. Richard, just on that, I've got a couple of questions here for you. With regards to the stone, quite a few questions or queries as to why it's not encased in glass or something, and why it's just left naked, so to speak.
Well, I think as Derek just said, you can't exactly run off with it. And I suppose the more people that rub their hands up and down it, you'll eventually get a smooth ashlar as opposed to the rough one that you've got there at the moment. But I don't know, it's never, one of the things that we've been a bit, as an organization, cavalier with some of our artifacts. But as I tried to say during the talk, that we've also brought a lot with us from the original hall of 1890. But I suppose it's one of those things that much better to stand there and have feel it before a meeting rather than have it encased in glass.
Thank you. Another one I have here is with regards. Let's have a look. Just reading down. Upper Brook Street. Now I know one of the brothers has put on there that it was sold for 90 million a while back. Why did we relinquish Upper Brook Street?
Most of the buildings in London are on long leaseholds, either from the Crown or places like the Westminster Estate. And so what happens is, if you, they were very wise to start with. When they took the hall on, the original hall in 64-65 Great Queen Street, they knew it was a 50-year lease. So 30 years later, they're making plans to get sufficient money either to renew the lease or to buy a lease elsewhere. I'm not an economist, but I know that as the lease winds down, it becomes less and less valuable. So there comes a point where you need to sell it. I don't know what it is about Masons in general, but very successful businessmen, when you put an apron and a chain on them, all of a sudden their business brains sort of disappear out of the window. And you can see that from the transactions that were undertaken by Mark Masonry. I know it's the same with any Masonic organization. I'm not picking on my own, so to speak. So yeah, it's hindsight's a wonderful thing, but they made quite a bit of money, profit or surplus, in the relatively short time that they had that building. But yes, I'm sure today it would go for a far greater sum, but then so will, or so could, the building that we're currently in.
Thank you. Now, I know you and I touched on this briefly. Why are the temples named as they are?
I did touch on it briefly. It reflects the amount of money that was raised by the individual provinces and districts. I think it is an excellent way of doing it. The thing that has never ceased to amaze me is the generosity of brethren from overseas. Again, it's another story and another talk, but the present UGLE, Freemasons Hall, very nearly didn't get built because at the time, lots of Masons in this country, rather than overseas, said, well, why are we going to be made to contribute to a building which many of us will never come and visit? It's for the benefit of London Masons. And a similar thing was said when monies were being collected for the, ultimately, the Mark Masons Hall that we're in. And that's where the Keystone Lodge system came in. But the generosity of members from overseas is absolutely profound. The initial scheme in 1930, the Transvaal district and Argentine district were the first to achieve, like, Keystone status from overseas, far in advance of many English provinces. It really did, if you like, what's the word, excite people, especially from overseas. But no, it was simply that the more money they raised, that's where they got named.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. We're going to move on to Brother Andy Croce now. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Andy.
You have, Amit. Thanks very much. Richard, first of all, I'd like to say that when you were at the editor of Square, it was a most enjoyable read. So thank you for your time spent there.
Thank you.
Fantastic editorship. Yeah, I have a question. I must admit, I didn't realise the Mark Mason's Hall did not have a library museum. And I know how extensive the Library and Museum of Freemasonry is at Great Queen Street.
Yeah.
So where do they keep all their artifacts, for instance? I mean, I know you said that there's a few that they brought over and they've got in the current temple, but I would imagine they've got a lot more than that stored somewhere. So is that stored separately? I mean, are there any plans to have a library somewhere, or what is their plan going forward on that? Do you know?
Right. Strange enough, when they were at Upper Brook Street, again, if you know about London houses, they would have a mews house at the back, and there were stables. And they converted the stables at Upper Brook Street into a museum and library. That's the only time we've ever had one. When I said about the vandalism, the reason we don't have any artifacts, or very few, is because in the move from the hall in Great Queen Street, lots of things were thrown away. The panelling that I described, the plaster ceilings, were all taken down and put into storage, but nobody knows where they were stored, and they were long lost, and regrettably we lost them, full stop. In the move from Upper Brook Street, I'm told of stories of skips outside the door where lots of stuff was just thrown away, including lots of records and what have you. In the current Mark Mason's Hall, we do have vaults downstairs. There are two, there's a lower ground floor and there's another floor below that. And there's a strong room where all the original records for all of the orders administered from Mark Mason's Hall are stored. But there are no other artifacts other than those dotted around the building. Things like the clock that was in the Grand Secretary's office and which is now in the boardroom. It's very sad, and it's not a good reflection on some of our predecessors, like the vandalism with the various portraits. The bottom halves of those must have been stored somewhere, or are somewhere.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
Best I can do. Sorry, Andy.
Oh, thank
Good
you.
to see you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Another question that's come in. The plans which were, so the original plans that never were,
Yes.
which then became the Connaught Room Hotel.
Yes.
86 St. James, the refurb that took place within 86 St. James on the internal structure, were they based upon the original plans?
No, because one of the things, the plans, copies of the plans are still in existence, because this is for the hall that never was, the 1940 one that is currently Connaught Rooms, because it was the whole of the Bacon's Hotel was going to be demolished, and it would be a new site. In other words, like they did with the Kingsway Hall. And so those plans were specific to that site. When it came to the current Mark Mason's Hall in St. James's, the criteria was a grand temple. And I should have emphasized that earlier, that the chief things are, or chief differences are, the original hall in Great Queen Street and the one in St. James's have a grand temple, whereas Upper Brook Street never did. So the criterion for when we moved to St. James's was we must have a grand temple, we must have sufficient lodge rooms so our various lodges and units can meet, and we should have excellent catering. And that was achieved by adapting what was previously a club. Because if you think about it, a lot of the activities that we undertake are similar to the ones that you'd find in a club.
Lovely, thank you, Richard. Next question: are virtual tours available? Especially, I suppose, in these indifferent times that we have.
The short answer is I don't believe so at the moment, but I think that's an excellent idea. And if that's one positive thing that comes from this talk, the pictures that I showed you of Mark Mason's Hall were supplied by the Grand Secretary and his team, I'm pleased to say, and the quality is excellent. So there's absolutely no reason why a virtual tour cannot be put together. And I shall make a note of that and drop a note to the Grand Secretary suggesting that myself.
I think it'd be fantastic, especially for those who maybe can't get here now or have never visited. In fact, you know, they don't have the availability to be able to come over and visit.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Next, I've got Paul again. Paul, hi there.
Hi, Richard. Just one other thing occurred to me. How did it come about that all those other orders were administered from Mark Mason's Hall?
You want another talk? Another story. It came in phases, if I can put it that way. So I mentioned both Portal and Binks, and in their, if you like, so their lifetime, their span when they were secretary and president of the board and Grand Master, what have you, they brought on board the Royal and Select Masters and the Allied Masonic degrees and the Red Cross of Constantine. And they did that to prevent, if you like, a proliferation of different administrations and different people setting up those orders, but not with looking at, what's the word, to Mark Mason's Hall for leadership. So that you're talking about the late 1870s, 1880s, when they came on board. Like everything else, the KT was independent. Well, it still is, but it decided to have an office in the Great Queen Street Mark Mason's Hall. So although independent, was actually renting rooms there. The OSM was the last one to join. And I did mention about the Royal Art Mariner, where eventually, exactly what I said, Morton Edwards had set up his own version of the Royal Art Mariner. I was eventually persuaded that the best interest of the order would be served if it came under the auspices of Mark Mason's Hall. So that it's basically on a piecemeal basis because it is cheaper or more effective for smaller orders to come under the wing of an overall administration where the costs can be shared out. Simple as that, I think.
Do they actually share the Mark administration, or do they have their own complete setup?
No, you'll find that you've got the Grand Secretary and an Assistant Secretary, and then Masonic support. But basically, the administration of the orders is shared out between the senior officers there. But in practice, whoever is the Grand Secretary, I mean, that's part of the rules, whoever is the Grand Secretary of the Mark is also the Grand Recorder or Grand Secretary of the other orders, and likewise with the Assistant and Deputy Grand Secretaries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Richard, I believe that's all we have time for. Just on a quick note, brethren, thank you so much, Richard. A few of our brethren have actually put on messages to say that virtual tours are now available. You visit the Mark Mason's Hall website, you'll be able to go through the virtual tour. And that's come about because there was a recent London open house that couldn't take place physically. So I believe they've put together a virtual tour for Mark Mason's Hall, which is great.
Somebody mentions it, and within 5 minutes, good administrator, it's happening.
That's it. It's wonderful. Excellent. Thank you ever so much. It's been a wonderful talk, to be honest with you. And I know that there'll be a lot of brethren out there who'll be catching it up on YouTube later on as well, or during the week once we've uploaded it. I feel that there's probably more that we can discuss and talk about, which you and I can discuss privately, perhaps.
Right.
And put another talk on, I'm sure. Brethren, just to announce the winners, they were Matthew Burt and Shirish Patel and Derek Silver. So well done to you all for guessing correctly. And what province was that, Richard?
Middlesex, of course.
Middlesex. There was a whole array. There was Kent. There was Warwickshire.
For goodness sake!
Somebody put India down, I think. But well done to you all. Matthew, thank you very much for giving up your mug, because I know you've already received one. So we'll make sure it goes to somebody who's on the list as well. Brethren, I wish you all a very, very good night. We'll see you all same time, same place next week, 6 p.m. Thank you once again for joining us here today. Your support, your continued support is really appreciated. Much love to you all.
Very good lecture.
Good night. Peace.
Good night.
Peace to all.
Thank you.